The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Independence, Missouri, as Willow Reed clutched the telegram to her chest, tears threatening to spill from her emerald eyes. The year was 1873, and with these few printed words, her world had collapsed entirely. Her husband of 3 years, Thomas, killed in a mining accident in Colorado Territory. She stood frozen on the wooden boardwalk, the evening bustle of the frontier town continuing around her as if the world hadn't just ended. Mrs. Reed. The telegraph operator's voice seemed to come from miles away. "Mrs. Reed, is there someone I can fetch for you?" Willow shook her head, finally looking up. "No, thank you, Mr. Peterson. I'll be fine." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue as she tucked the telegram into her pocket and started the long walk back to the small house that suddenly felt so empty. The next weeks passed in a fog of grief. Friends and neighbors brought food and condolences, but Willow barely registered their presence. Thomas had been everything to her childhood sweetheart, best friend, husband. The life they'd planned together on the frontier now seemed like a cruel joke. What was she to do with herself now? A 24-year-old widow with nothing but a small house and dwindling savings. "You need to think about moving back east, dear," Mrs. Holloway said one afternoon as she poured tea in Willow's kitchen. The older woman had been checking on her regularly since the news came. "Perhaps to your aunt in Boston. A refined city would suit a young woman like yourself better than this rough place." "Independence is my home," Willow replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Without a husband, what future is there for you here?" Mrs. Holloway asked, not unkindly. "You're still young, but not so young that you can afford to waste time, and after such a love as you and Thomas shared." She sighed dramatically. "Well, they say lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. Best to make a practical arrangement with a suitable widower back east." "They?" Willow questioned. "Everyone knows it, dear. Once you've loved that deeply and lost, the heart simply can't recover fully. Not to love that way again. It would be foolish to expect it." It wasn't the first time Willow had heard such sentiments since Thomas's death. The pastor's wife, her neighbor Mrs. Fletcher, even the shopkeeper's daughter all had offered variations of the same. She'd never love again, not like she had with Thomas. She should settle for security, for companionship without passion. The words burrowed deep into her heart until she began to believe them herself. Summer turned to fall, and with it came the harvest season. Willow had taken work at the general store, desperate to keep herself occupied and to supplement her dwindling finances. The routine helped, giving structure to days that might otherwise have been consumed by grief. She was arranging a new shipment of fabrics when the bell above the door chimed. Looking up, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the bright October sunlight. "Afternoon," came a deep voice as the man stepped inside, removing his hat. "Looking for some supplies?" Willow blinked, taking in the stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sky. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt, and a thin scar traced its way along his jawline. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way, but something about his presence commanded attention. "Of course," she replied, smoothing her apron. "What can I help you with?" "Need coffee, flour, salt, ammunition for a Winchester, and a good hunting knife if you've got one." He glanced around the store. "Maybe some tobacco, too." "Mr. Thompson handles the ammunition and knives," Willow explained, gesturing toward the back of the store where the owner was helping another customer. "But I can gather the rest for you." As she collected the items, she felt his eyes on her. Not in the uncomfortable way some men looked at women, but with a thoughtful, measured gaze. "You new to Independence?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. Just passing through, he answered. Name's Kieran Adler. Got a job with the cattle drive heading south. Willow Reed, she offered in return, placing his items on the counter. You a cowboy, then? Something like amusement flickered across his face. Among other things, mostly I go where the work is. Been doing that since the war. His mention of the war, which could only mean the terrible conflict that had torn the nation apart less than a decade ago, made her look at him more carefully. He'd have been young then, but old enough to fight. It explained something about the weathered look in his eyes. Will you be staying in Independence long? She asked, calculating his total. Depends on when the drive moves out. Week, maybe 2. He placed coins on the counter, more than enough for his purchases. Your change, Mr. Adler. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the coins, and Willow felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. His hand was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. Thank you, Mrs. Reed, he said, tipping his hat as he gathered his supplies. Miss, she corrected automatically, then flushed. I mean, I'm a widow, actually. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, which she'd grown to hate, but a kind of understanding. Sorry for your loss. With that, he nodded and left the store, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind him. Willow realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out slowly. There was something about Kieran Adler that unsettled her, though not in an unpleasant way. It was the first time since Thomas's death that she'd felt present, aware. As if she'd been moving through life half asleep and had suddenly blinked awake. She shook the feeling off, returning to her work. The interaction meant nothing, just a passing traveler who'd soon be gone from Independence, taking the cattle drive south to Texas, or wherever such men went. 2 days later, Willow was walking home from the store in the fading light when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Stepping to the side of the road, she turned to see who was riding so fast at dusk. It was Kieran Adler, though he slowed his horse as he approached her. Mrs. Reed, he called, pulling alongside. Bit late to be walking alone, isn't it? Independence is perfectly safe, she replied, though this wasn't entirely true. The town had its share of troublemakers, especially when the saloons were full. He glanced at the darkening sky. Maybe so, but would you allow me to escort you home? It would ease my conscience. Willow hesitated. She'd been raised to be cautious around strangers, especially men, but something about Kieran Adler's direct gaze made her feel she could trust him. Very well, she agreed. He dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse beside her as they walked. The animal was a fine chestnut gelding, well groomed despite the dust of travel. You've been in Independence before? She asked, curious about this man who seemed both familiar with frontier towns yet somehow apart from them. Passed through once or twice. It's growing. He looked around at the buildings, some newly constructed, railroads changing everything. For the better, most say. Depends on who you ask. Changes like that leave some folks behind. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Willow's curiosity got the better of her. You said you've been working since the war. Were you? Did you fight? His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Union cavalry. Enlisted at 17, though I told them I was 19. Spent 3 years fighting before Appomattox. The way he said it told Willow there was much more to the story, but she didn't press. The war had left scars on everyone, some more visible than others. My husband, she began, then stopped herself. She rarely spoke of Thomas to strangers. You don't have to talk about him, Kieran said quietly. No, it's all right. Willow took a breath. Thomas was too young for the war, thankfully. He died in a mining accident last spring. We'd been married 3 years. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time she believed he truly meant it. Mining's dangerous work. He didn't want to go, she admitted, But the money was good, and we had plans to buy land of our own someday. They'd reached her small house on the edge of town, a modest two-room structure that Thomas had been so proud to provide for her. Now it stood as a monument to dreams unrealized. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Adler," Willow said, stopping at her gate. He nodded, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "My pleasure, Mrs. Reed." As he mounted his horse, she found herself reluctant to end the interaction. "Mr. Adler, the cattle drive, when do you think it will leave?" "Hard to say. Boss is waiting on some paperwork and a few more hands to show up." He settled into his saddle. "Could be another week yet." "I see," Willow said, not sure why this information made her feel relieved. "Well, good night then." "Good night, Mrs. Reed." He tipped his hat and rode off into the gathering dusk. Willow stood at her gate for a long moment, watching his silhouette disappear. Something about Kieran Adler stirred feelings she'd thought long buried with Thomas. Not love, nothing so dramatic, but interest, curiosity. A sense that life might still hold surprises. It was a dangerous thought. The next morning at the general store, Willow found herself glancing toward the door whenever the bell chimed. By midday, she was irritated with herself. This schoolgirl behavior was beneath her dignity as a widow. "You seem distracted today," Mr. Thompson observed as she miscounted a shipment for the second time. "Just tired," she lied, refocusing on her task. She'd nearly convinced herself to forget about Kieran Adler when he walked through the door just before closing time. He nodded to her as he approached the counter. "Mr. Adler," she greeted him, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the quickening of her pulse. "Mrs. Reed." He removed his hat. "Need a few more things before we head out. The drive is leaving soon, then." She began gathering his requested items: more coffee, bandages, a small jar of honey. "Day after tomorrow, if all goes to plan." He watched her work, his expression thoughtful. "Been thinking about our conversation yesterday." Willow paused, looking up at him. "Oh. You mentioned your husband had plans to buy land." He shifted, as if uncomfortable bringing up the topic. "What will you do now? Stay in Independence?" The personal question surprised her. "I haven't decided. Some think I should return east to family." "Is that what you want?" No one had asked her that what she wanted. They'd all been telling her what she should do. "I don't know," she admitted. "Independence is home now, but without Thomas." She trailed off, unsure how to express the emptiness she felt. Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Hard to imagine a future different than the one you planned." "Exactly." She finished gathering his supplies, oddly grateful for his perception. "That will be 87 cents. He placed $1 on the counter. "Keep the change." "That's too generous, please." His eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I'd like to ask you something, Mrs. Reed. There's a social at the church tomorrow evening. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation stunned Willow into momentary silence. She hadn't been to any social events since Thomas died, and certainly hadn't considered attending one with another man. I don't know if that would be appropriate," she stammered. "I'm still in mourning." "It's been 6 months, hasn't it?" His voice was gentle. "I'm not suggesting anything improper. Just an evening of company before I leave town." Willow hesitated. The proper thing would be to refuse, to continue her quiet life of grief and work. But something in her rebelled at the thought of another lonely evening in her empty house. "I would need to think about it," she finally said. "Of course." He gathered his purchases. "I'll stop by tomorrow afternoon for your answer, if that's acceptable." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. As the door closed behind him, Mr. Thompson emerged from the back room with a disapproving frown. "That cowboy asking you to the social?" "Yes," Willow admitted, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "Hardly seems proper, you being a widow not yet a year." He shook his head. Those cattle drovers are a rough lot, too. Not the kind of men decent women associate with. His words stung, partly because they echoed her own doubts. Mr. Adler seems respectable enough. Maybe so, Thompson conceded, but what would Thomas think? And what about your reputation in town? The question haunted Willow as she walked home that evening. What would Thomas think? The answer came with surprising clarity. He would want her to be happy, to live fully. Thomas had been full of life and joy. He would hate to see her existing as merely a shadow of herself. Still, the thought of attending a social, of stepping back into life, filled her with both anticipation and dread. What would people say? How would it feel to be in a festive setting when her heart still ached with loss? And more troubling, what did it mean that she was even considering accepting Kieran Adler's invitation? That night, sleep eluded her as she wrestled with her decision. By morning, she still hadn't made up her mind, but the prospect of seeing Kieran again made her heart beat faster in a way it hadn't for months. At the store, several customers mentioned the upcoming social, and Willow felt their curious glances. Word traveled fast in a small town like Independence. "Heard that cattle driver asked you to the social," Mrs. Fletcher said as she selected fabric for a new dress. The older woman's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp with interest. "News certainly spreads quickly," Willow replied, measuring out 3 yards of calico. "Just looking out for you, dear. A young widow needs to be careful about her reputation." Mrs. Fletcher leaned closer. "And you know what they say after losing a love like Thomas, you'll never feel that way again. Best not to encourage attentions that might lead to disappointment." There it was again, that certainty that her capacity for love had died with Thomas. Willow cut the fabric with more force than necessary. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Fletcher." The afternoon dragged on interminably until finally, just as she was preparing to close the store, Kieran appeared. The sight of him, tall and solid in the doorway, made her heart skip. "Mrs. Reed," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Mr. Adler." She finished sweeping, aware of his eyes on her. "You've come for my answer if you're ready to give it." Willow set the broom aside, finally meeting his gaze directly. "I believe I will attend the social this evening. But," she added quickly, "you should know that there's been talk already. Small towns have long memories and sharp tongues." "Does that bother you?" he asked, studying her face. "Did it?" Willow considered the question honestly. She'd always cared about propriety, about fitting into the community. But these past months had taught her how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change. "Less than I thought it would," she admitted. "I'll need to go home and change." "Shall I meet you there?" A smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his gray eyes. "I'd prefer to escort you properly if you'll allow it. 7 o'clock. 7 would be fine," she agreed, feeling a flutter of anticipation that was both familiar and strange. As she prepared that evening, Willow found herself taking extra care with her appearance for the first time in months. She chose her blue dress, not the black she'd worn since Thomas's death, and pinned her hair up in a style he had always admired. The face that looked back at her from the mirror seemed both familiar and strange, older in some ways, with new lines of grief etched around her eyes, but also somehow fresher, as if some essential part of her was awakening from a long sleep. When Kieran knocked on her door precisely at 7, she was ready. He stood on her porch in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, looking far more like a gentleman than the rough cowboy image he usually presented. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the sincerity in his voice making her blush. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." She stepped out, locking the door behind her. The church was only a short walk away, and as they approached, Willow could hear fiddle music and laughter spilling out into the night. Her steps slowed, sudden anxiety gripping her. We don't have to stay long, Kieran said quietly, sensing her hesitation. Just one dance if you like. His understanding gave her courage. No, it's all right. I want to be here. They entered the church hall, which had been transformed with lanterns and autumn decorations. Conversations paused momentarily as people noticed them, and Willow felt the weight of curious stares. She lifted her chin, determined not to show her discomfort. Pastor Williams approached first, his wife beside him. "Mrs. Reed, how wonderful to see you here. It's been too long." "Thank you, Pastor," Willow replied. "This is Mr. Adler, who was kind enough to escort me this evening." The pastor shook Kieran's hand, his expression a mixture of surprise and cautious approval. "Welcome, Mr. Adler. Any friend of Mrs. Reed's is welcome in our community." As the evening progressed, Willow found herself relaxing. Some people were clearly disapproving, but others seemed genuinely pleased to see her participating in the community again. And Kieran proved to be an attentive companion, bringing her punch and introducing himself respectfully to anyone who approached. When the fiddler struck up a waltz, Kieran turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Reed?" Willow hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Thomas died, but the music called to something in her, some part that remembered joy. "I would," she said, placing her hand in his. He led her onto the floor with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. His hand was warm at her waist, strong and steady as he guided her through the steps. "You dance well," she observed as they moved among the other couples. "My mother insisted all her sons learn." A shadow crossed his face. "Said we'd never find proper wives otherwise. And did you find a wife?" The question slipped out before she could consider its impropriety. His expression closed slightly. "No, the war came and after." "Well, the kind of life I've led doesn't lend itself to settling down." There was a story there, Willow sensed, but this wasn't the time to press. Instead, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, the music, the movement, the solid presence of this man who had, however briefly, drawn her back into the world of the living. As the dance ended, she became aware of whispers and glances from some of the town matrons gathered near the refreshment table. Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Fletcher were watching with clear disapproval, their heads bent together in conversation. "They're talking about us," she murmured as Kieran led her from the dance floor. "Let them talk," he replied, his voice low but intense. "You've done nothing wrong, Willow." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. Perhaps not, but... She glanced at the women again. "They think I'm being disrespectful to Thomas's memory." "Is that what you think?" Kieran's eyes held hers, searching. "No," she realized with surprise. "No, I don't. Thomas would want me to live, not just exist." Kieran's smile was warm with approval. "Wise man, your Thomas." Yes, he was. For the first time, speaking of her husband didn't bring only pain but a bittersweet fondness. They stayed another hour, dancing twice more and speaking with various townspeople. When they finally left, the night had grown cooler and Kieran offered Willow his jacket. It smelled of leather and wood smoke, enveloping her in warmth as they walked back toward her house. "Thank you for this evening," she said as they reached her gate. "It was more enjoyable than I expected." "I'm glad." He stood with his hat in his hands, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The drive leaves tomorrow, I know." The reminder brought a surprising pang of regret. "I hope you have safe travels." Kieran seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "I'll be coming back through Independence in about 6 weeks after we deliver the cattle. Would it be too forward to call on you then?" The question took her breath away. This wasn't just a kind gesture to a lonely widow. He was expressing genuine interest in seeing her again. I don't know what to say," she admitted. You don't have to say anything now." His voice was gentle. "Just think about it. I'll understand if you decide against it." Willow looked up at him, this man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life and stirred feelings she'd thought were buried forever. "I would like to see you again," she said softly. "When you return." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Then I'll come back." "You have my word on that." He took her hand and with old-fashioned courtesy pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was chaste but sent warmth spiraling through her. "Good night, Willow Reed," he said, releasing her hand. "Good night, Kieran Adler," she replied, suddenly shy. She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she enter her house, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. What had she done? Agreed to see a man she barely knew, a drifting cowboy who might never return despite his promise. Was she being foolish, setting herself up for more heartache? And yet, as she prepared for bed, Willow realized something important. For the first time since Thomas's death, she was looking forward to something. The thought of Kieran returning in 6 weeks gave her a reason to count the days, to imagine a future beyond mere existence. Sleep came easily that night, and her dreams were not of the past, but of possibilities. The following morning, Willow rose early and went about her usual routine, though everything seemed somehow brighter, more vivid. At the general store, she worked with new energy, even humming softly as she arranged displays. "Someone's in a cheerful mood," Mr. Thompson observed, eyebrows raised. "It's a beautiful day," Willow replied, refusing to be drawn into explaining her change in demeanor. As closing time approached, she found herself listening for hoofbeats, for the shop bell to ring one last time. But Kieran didn't come to say goodbye. The cattle drive must have left early, she reasoned, trying to quell her disappointment. She locked the store and started the walk home, the autumn evening crisp around her. The sound of approaching riders made her heart leap, but it was only a couple of local ranchers heading toward the saloon. "Evening, Mrs. Reed," one called as they passed. "Good evening, Mr. Carson," she replied automatically, continuing her walk. When she reached her house, she stopped short. Tied to her front porch railing was a small bunch of late wildflowers, prairie asters, and goldenrod bound with a piece of leather cord. Tucked into the makeshift bouquet was a folded note. With fingers that suddenly trembled, Willow opened it to find a few lines of bold, masculine handwriting. "Willow, the drive left earlier than expected. I'll return in 6 weeks as promised. Until then, remember that what others say about your heart's capacity isn't necessarily true." Kieran, she read the note 3 times, her heart beating faster with each reading. The simplicity of his message touched her deeply. He understood what people had been saying to her, that she'd never love again, and was gently challenging that assumption. Taking the flowers inside, she placed them in a small jar of water on her kitchen table, where their bright colors seemed to bring life to the quiet room. The note she tucked into her Bible, not ready to examine too closely what it meant to her. The next 6 weeks passed both slowly and quickly. Willow threw herself into her work at the store, took up sewing again, and even attended church socials without Kieran's escort. There were still whispers, still those who thought she was moving on too quickly from her grief, but she found herself caring less about their opinions. The first snow of the season dusted Independence in early December, transforming the dusty frontier town into something almost magical. Willow walked to work with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, admiring the way the morning sun glinted off the fresh powder. 6 weeks had come and gone. Willow tried not to count the days, tried not to look up eagerly each time the shop bell rang. Cattle drives were unpredictable, she reminded herself. There could be any number of reasons for delay, or perhaps he'd simply changed his mind. The thought brought an ache she wasn't prepared for. One particularly cold afternoon, as she was arranging a display of Christmas goods, the bell chimed. She looked up, her practiced greeting dying on her lips as she saw who stood in the doorway, Kieran Adler, his coat dusted with snow, his face leaner than she remembered but his eyes just as intensely blue. "Mrs. Reed," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Adler." She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "You've returned to independence, as promised." He stepped further into the store, his gaze never leaving her face. "Though later than I intended. The drive ran into trouble near the Kansas border rustlers. Concern flooded her." "Were you hurt?" "Nothing serious." He dismissed it with a slight gesture, though she noticed he favored his left side. "How have you been, Willow?" The use of her given name, so natural on his lips, made her smile despite herself. "Well enough. Independence hasn't changed much in your absence." "And you, have you changed?" His question held layers of meaning. Before she could answer, Mr. Thompson emerged from the back room, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Kieran. "Back in town, are you?" he asked, not entirely welcoming. "Just arrived," Kieran replied evenly. Thompson looked between them. "Mrs. Reed, it's nearly closing time. You should go on home before the snow gets heavier." It was a dismissal, thinly disguised as concern. Willow might have protested under normal circumstances, but tonight she was grateful for the opportunity. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'll see you tomorrow." She gathered her things quickly, aware of Kieran waiting patiently by the door. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily, big flakes drifting lazily in the fading light. Kieran fell into step beside her as they walked away from the store. "I hope I didn't cause trouble for you," he said, glancing back at the storefront. "Mr. Thompson is protective," Willow explained. "He thinks all cowboys are dangerous rogues." "He's not entirely wrong," Kieran admitted with a hint of a smile. "Though I like to think I'm one of the more civilized rogues." The easy banter between them felt natural, as if the 6 weeks of separation had never happened. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the snow crunching beneath their boots. "How long will you stay in Independence this time?" Willow finally asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Kieran seemed to consider his words carefully. "That depends in part on you." Her heart skipped. "On me." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the middle of the snowy street. "I've been thinking about you, Willow. About that night at the social, about the way you looked when you danced." His directness took her breath away. "Kieran, let me finish, please." His eyes were earnest in the gathering dusk. "I know you lost someone you loved deeply. I know people have told you that you'll never feel that way again, but they're wrong." A snowflake landed on her cheek, melting instantly, or perhaps it was a tear. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen it happen. Because I believe the heart isn't limited in how many times it can love." He took a step closer to her. "Because when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time, and I hope you might feel it too." Willow's heart pounded against her ribs. This was happening too fast, too soon after Thomas. And yet, hadn't she been thinking of Kieran every day since he'd left? Hadn't she found herself imagining conversations with him, wondering what he would think of this or that? "I don't know what to say," she whispered, echoing her words from 6 weeks ago. "Say you'll give us a chance to find out," he replied, his voice low and intense. "Say you'll let me court you properly." Court her. The old-fashioned term made the moment more real somehow. This wasn't just attraction or loneliness. He was proposing something meaningful. "People will talk," she said, though even to her own ears it sounded like a weak objection. "Let them." His smile was challenging. "They told you you'd never love again. Let's prove them wrong." The words hung in the snowy air between them, a gauntlet thrown down against convention, against the limits others had placed on her heart's capacity. "Yes," she found herself saying, the word emerging with surprising conviction. "Yes, I think I'd like that very much." His smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of the street, but instead, he offered his arm with formal courtesy. "May I walk you home, Mrs. Reed?" She slipped her gloved hand through his arm, feeling the solid strength of him even through layers of winter clothing. "You may, Mr. Adler." As they continued through the snowy evening, Willow felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in nearly a year. It wasn't betrayal of Thomas, she realized, but a continuation of living something he would have wanted for her. At her gate, Kieran paused. "Would you allow me to call on you tomorrow evening? Perhaps for dinner?" "I would like that," she replied, surprising herself with her lack of hesitation. "Until tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat, his eyes warm despite the cold night. "Good night, Willow." "Good night, Kieran." As she watched him walk away, snow gathering on his broad shoulders, Willow felt a flutter of something she'd thought dead within her, hope, perhaps. Or the first stirrings of something that might, given time, become love again. The following weeks saw Kieran become a regular fixture in Willow's life. True to his word, he courted her with old-fashioned propriety that gradually won over even some of the more skeptical townspeople. He took her to church socials, escorted her on walks through town, and sometimes simply sat with her on her front porch, talking until the stars emerged. Through these conversations, Willow learned more about the man behind the cowboy exterior. Kieran had grown up in Pennsylvania, the third of 5 sons. He'd fought at Gettysburg and Antietam, experiences he spoke of rarely and with pain in his eyes. After the war, unable to settle back into civilian life, he drifted west, working cattle drives, scouting for the army occasionally, even trying his hand at prospecting. Never found enough gold to make it worth the trouble, he told her one evening as they sat by her fire. "But I learned a lot about what I didn't want." "And what was that?" she asked, fascinated by the glimpses into his past. "Didn't want to spend my life chasing something that might not exist." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, met hers. "Realized I'd rather build something real, something that lasts." In turn, Willow shared her own story, her childhood in Missouri, meeting Thomas when they were both 16, their simple wedding 3 years later. She spoke of their dreams, their plans for children who never came, the hardships and joys of their short life together. To her surprise, talking about Thomas with Kieran didn't feel disloyal. Instead, it was as if speaking of him kept his memory alive while allowing her to move forward. Not everyone in Independence approved of their developing relationship. Mrs. Fletcher made pointed remarks about decent mourning periods when Willow was within earshot, and Mr. Thompson continued to eye Kieran with suspicion whenever he came to meet Willow after work. "Don't let it trouble you," Kieran said when she mentioned these reactions. "People fear what they don't understand. The idea that a heart can heal, can love again, it frightens them, makes their own limitations too obvious." His insight surprised her. For a man who presented himself as a simple cowboy, Kieran understood human nature with remarkable clarity. As Christmas approached, Independence transformed itself with greenery and ribbons. The general store was busier than ever, leaving Willow exhausted but fulfilled at the end of each day. Kieran, who had found work at the livery stable for the winter, often met her at closing time to walk her home. One particularly cold evening, as they walked through town with fresh snow crunching beneath their boots, Kieran seemed unusually thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" Willow asked, her breath fogging in the frigid air. He glanced at her, then looked ahead again. Been thinking about the future. Oh, her heart quickened. I've never stayed in one place this long since the war, he admitted. Always kept moving. But lately, I've been wondering what it might be like to stop. Willow tried to keep her voice steady. And what have you concluded? Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. Snow gathered on his hat brim as he looked down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That depends on you, he said simply. On me. He took her gloved hands in his. I'm not a wealthy man, Willow. I don't have land or a fine house to offer. But I've saved some money enough to make a start. Could buy a small place outside town, raise horses maybe. Her heart was hammering now, understanding where his words were leading. Kieran, I know it's soon, he continued, his voice low and urgent. I know there are those who'll say you're dishonoring Thomas's memory, but I've come to care for you deeply, Willow Reed, more than I thought possible. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness but of a complicated joy. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you might consider building a future with me. Not right away, I know you need time, but someday. His eyes held hers, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I'm asking if you think you could love me, even a fraction of how you loved him. The question hung between them in the snowy night, the most important question anyone had asked her since Thomas had proposed years ago. Could she love again? Not just care for someone, not just find comfort in companionship, but truly give her heart. Looking into Kieran's face, weathered by sun and hardship but so alive with hope, Willow realized something profound. She already did. Not in the same way she'd loved Thomas that had been the love of innocent youth, of shared childhood dreams. What she felt for Kieran was different, deeper in some ways, more knowing, tempered by loss and grief but stronger for having survived them. I don't need to consider a future with you, she said finally, her voice soft but sure. I've already begun to imagine it. His face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away. Willow, are you saying? I'm saying yes, Kieran Adler. She squeezed his hands through their gloves. Yes, I could love you. Yes, I think I already do. He pulled her close then, his arms strong around her. When he lowered his face to hers, his kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. It was nothing like Thomas's kisses had been, and yet perfect in its own right, a new beginning, not a replacement. When they finally parted, both breathless in the cold air, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. They were wrong, he murmured. All of them who said you couldn't love again. Yes, Willow agreed, a smile spreading across her face. Let's keep proving them wrong. Their engagement announcement in early spring caused the expected stir in Independence. Some, like Pastor Williams and his wife, offered genuine congratulations. Others whispered behind their hands about indecent haste and questioned whether a drifting cowboy could ever settle into respectability. Willow found she cared less about these opinions with each passing day. The joy she'd rediscovered with Kieran was too precious to diminish with others' disapproval. Kieran kept his word about putting down roots. With his savings and some additional funds Willow had set aside, they purchased a small property 3 miles outside of town, 15 acres with a modest cabin and a barn that needed repair. It's not much, he said apologetically, as they stood looking at their future home for the first time. But we can build on it over time. Willow slipped her hand into his, remembering similar conversations with Thomas years ago. Different dreams, different man, but the same sense of possibility. It's perfect, she assured him. A place to begin. They were married in May 1874, almost exactly a year after Thomas's death. Willow wore a dress of pale blue rather than traditional white, acknowledging in this small way that this was a second chance at happiness, not a first beginning. As they spoke their vows in the small church, Willow felt Thomas's memory as a gentle presence, not an obstacle. She would always love him, always honor what they had shared. But her heart had proven larger than anyone, including herself, had believed possible. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams declared. "You may kiss your bride." Kieran's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The wedding reception was held at their new property, where friends and even some former skeptics gathered to wish them well. Mrs. Holloway, who had once been so certain Willow could never love again, pressed her hand warmly. "I was wrong about you, my dear," she admitted. "Anyone can see how happy you are." "Thank you," Willow replied sincerely. "I've learned that the heart is more resilient than we give it credit for." As the celebration continued around them, Kieran drew Willow away from the crowd, leading her to the small rise behind their cabin. From this vantage point, they could see across the rolling prairie to where Independence sat nestled in the distance. "Happy?" he asked, his arm secure around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "And you? Any regrets about settling down?" He looked out across the land, their land now, his expression thoughtful. "None. Spent too many years wandering, time to build something that lasts." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the horizon in brilliant oranges and pinks. A new beginning, Willow thought. Not erasing the past, but growing beyond it. "They told me I'd never love again," she said softly. "I believed them for a while." Kieran turned her to face him, his eyes serious in the fading light. "And now?" She smiled, reaching up to touch his face, the face that had become so dear to her in such a relatively short time. "Now I know better. The heart doesn't recognize limits others try to place on it. It simply loves where it will." His answering smile was tender, as he lowered his lips to hers once more. In that kiss was a promise of days and years to come, of a love built not on forgotten grief, but on the understanding that joy can follow sorrow, that one love doesn't diminish another, but adds to the richness of a life fully lived. As they walked hand in hand back to their wedding celebration, Willow knew with certainty they would keep proving them wrong day by day, for all the years to come. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Kieran set about repairing the barn and cabin, revealing a skill with tools that surprised Willow. She continued working at the general store until their first child was born, a son they named Michael Thomas Adler, honoring both Kieran's father and Willow's first husband. The boy had Kieran's storm-gray eyes and Willow's quiet determination. Life on their small homestead was never easy, but it was rich with purpose. Kieran began breeding and training horses, developing a reputation for producing mounts with both spirit and reliability. Willow kept a large garden and took in sewing when time allowed, their combined efforts gradually building the prosperity they'd dreamed of. Their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Michael. With her mother's auburn hair and her father's adventurous spirit, she brought a new dimension of joy to their growing family. Watching Kieran with their children patient, loving, firm when needed, Willow often found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance at happiness. There were difficult moments, of course. Times when Kieran grew restless with the routine of settled life, when the open horizon seemed to call to him with memories of his wandering years. Days when Willow caught herself wondering what life would have been like if Thomas had lived, if they'd realized their own dreams together. But these moments passed, leaving behind a deeper understanding between them. They weren't perfect, either of them, but they were perfect in their commitment to each other, to the family they were building, to the life they'd chosen together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Willow by taking her for a ride to the far edge of their property, which had grown to 40 acres through hard work and careful saving. "I want to show you something," he said, helping her dismount near a grove of cottonwoods that bordered a small creek. He led her through the trees to a clearing where a foundation had been laid, the beginnings of a house much larger than their cabin. "Kieran," Willow gasped, taking in the sight. "When did you do this? Been working on it when you thought I was mending fences." His eyes were bright with pride and love. "The cabin served us well, but with the children growing, thought we could use more room." Tears filled her eyes as she walked around the foundation, seeing in her mind the home it would become. "It's wonderful. Wanted to give you the home you deserve," he said, coming to stand beside her. "One big enough for all the children we might have, for grandchildren someday." The mention of a future stretching so far ahead moved her deeply. This man, who had once been unable to stay in one place for more than a few months, was now planning for generations. "I love it," she said, turning to embrace him. "And I love you, Kieran Adler, more each day." His arms tightened around her. "Remember what they said, that you'd never love again, I remember." "Been proving them wrong for 5 years now," he murmured against her hair. "And we'll keep proving them wrong," she promised, "for 50 more." In the years that followed, their house was completed, a handsome 2-story structure with rooms enough for their growing family, which eventually included a third child, another son they named James. The Adler homestead became known throughout the region for its fine horses and warm hospitality. Willow sometimes thought about those dark days after Thomas's death, when she'd believed her capacity for love had died with him. How wrong she'd been. Her heart had not been diminished by loss but expanded by it, made capable of embracing a new love while honoring the old. And Kieran, once a drifter with no place to call home, found in Willow and their children an anchor he'd never known he needed. His restless spirit found purpose in building something lasting, something that would outlive them both. On warm summer evenings, they often sat together on the porch of the house Kieran had built, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over land that was truly theirs. In these moments, surrounded by the life they'd created together, Willow felt a completeness that transcended all the pain that had come before. They had proven them wrong. All those who claimed the heart could not heal, could not love deeply a second time. Proven them wrong with every day lived in full awareness of life's preciousness, with every challenge faced together, with every moment of joy shared and multiplied. And in this proving, they had discovered a truth more powerful than grief. That love, once known, prepares the heart not for emptiness but for fullness, for the courage to risk loving again, for the wisdom to recognize that some endings are also beginnings. As twilight deepened into night, Kieran reached for Willow's hand, a gesture as familiar now as breathing. Their fingers entwined, a physical manifestation of the lives they had woven together, strand by strand, day by day, choice by choice. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had on their wedding day so many years ago. "Completely," she answered, meaning it as deeply now as she had then. The stars emerged above them, bright points of light in the vast Missouri sky. Their children's laughter echoed across the homestead that had once been just a dream. And in the quiet of the gathering night, 2 hearts beat in rhythm, testament to a love that had defied all limitations, all predictions, all doubts. They had proven them wrong. And in doing so, they had proven something far more important about the resilience of the human heart, about its capacity not just to survive loss but to flourish beyond it, reaching always toward love's enduring promise.